Deep in central Florida, there's a town that almost nobody remembers. A place that, in the early 1900s, helped feed a nation. A place home to over 400 people with schools, churches, and businesses. It was alive. But in the Cold War, the purpose of this place quietly changed. For a brief moment, it was connected to something much bigger than agriculture, something nuclear. And when that chapter ended, it didn't leave a monument. It was dismantled, filed away, and mostly forgotten. The town never really came back. Today, what's left of Nichols is sitting right here.
Wow.
A machine that built the town and outlived it. And that's what we're exploring today. Good morning. Welcome to Central Florida, to a place maybe 15 miles from where I grew up, but a place that I had no idea existed until recently. This is Nichols, Florida, which is a company town built on a product that not many of us think about, and that is fertilizer, which on paper might seem sort of boring, but here in Central Florida was big business. This town used to have 400 residents, families, banks, churches, all because what happened right behind me. And for a brief period of time, this town was connected to something much bigger than agriculture, something that quietly changed the use of this town and eventually led to its demise. So today, let's learn the history and look around Nichols, Florida. When people think about the history of Florida, they think about tourism, beaches, maybe oranges, but very few people think about mining. But before Florida looks like it did today, it was an ocean, and that ocean brought a lot of rich deposits, including soil that was very rich in phosphate, and nobody really cared about that until the 1800s, when they realized that that phosphate could be used for fertilizer, and that fertilizer would grow more farmland. So suddenly, this area in Central Florida that we're in right now, Bone Valley, became very important in the fertilizer business. And that changed everything. It wasn't necessarily just about beauty, it was about efficiency. And towns like this, towns like Nichols, where we're at right now, were built to kind of service that industry. And so we're going to take a look around, check out all these buildings, and learn a little bit more about the phosphate and everything that went along with it. And I'm excited. Nichols was established in the early 1900s as phosphate mining expanded across Florida's Bone Valley. This plant here was built in the early 20th century when demand for fertilizer was exploding worldwide. For decades, it produced phosphate pulled from the surrounding mines, helping make the fertilizer that fed farms across America and beyond. Operations here continued through most of the 1900s before finally shutting down in the late 1990s and early 2000s as the industry consolidated and production moved elsewhere. So this is cool. We're over in kind of the storage and transit depot, and you can see these belts would come in here, push the phosphate down, that'd go down there. You can see below it's a couple floors down. That would go into almost like a hopper to load onto the train tracks, and it's cool to see all of this here. For me, at least, whenever I go to a place like this, my mind tries to fill in what it was like when it was still buzzing. Kind of the nostalgia almost to see it's still left in place. So we're up here on the roof of the first building that we saw, And this is kind of the whole operation. And you can get a lot of history about the mining in Central Florida from right here, this snapshot. So phosphate mining is a lot different than, underground mining like I have at Cerro Gordo, where here it'd be open pits. And a lot of times it's with these big dredges that are going through. And so they're scraping down 15, 50 feet. They're trying to get to the phosphate, but it's mixed in with sand, clay, a bunch of other stuff. So first they bring it back here. They bring it to a place like we see right over there that we can go into later. They blast it with water, trying to get the sand to sink, the clay to float, try to get down to that phosphate rock. That would then be sent up a conveyor like we're seeing here. So this thing that we're seeing going right there, that's to move the material from over there to over here. And so they're adding a sulfuric acid to it to get it down to the fertilizer that we know today. There's a heating process involved where the wet phosphate comes in, it gets dried to get it down to what you need to, acid is added, then you get your fertilizer. Then from there, it would have been processed, sent on this conveyor belt that we see here, up over into kind of the loading bay situation that we saw before, filter down into that dark room we were just in, finally onto carts to go out, and then finally the train would take it away. And that's kind of the promise of these towns. You imagine, look around, there used to be hundreds of people living here with houses and buildings and dreams and ambitions and all of that. And when a place like this isn't useful anymore, that's kind of the inherent contract that everything that goes with the town goes away. So we're here in kind of the conveyor belt system between the two buildings. So this is where the material would have gone from, raw going over there to kind of finished, where it's coming up here and to get loaded in the trucks. You can see just huge conveyors, which must have been quite the scene back in the day. Over here you have more of a hopper, more belts. You see some lines coming in. All right, so that was kind of the holding bay. That's kind of where the end of the process was. But now we are headed over here to where the action really happened. And I'm excited because this is where a lot of the processing happened. That's where a lot of the cool machinery is. And if you're thinking like, why do I care about phosphate? I thought the same thing. I grew up 15 miles down the road and didn't think about phosphate very much at all. But phosphorus is how modern agriculture happens. Every plant needs phosphorus, and phosphate is how we give it to them. Without phosphate, we're not feeding 8 billion people. And again, it just makes me think that that's the importance of diving into the local history all around you. I didn't think anything of any of this growing up, but now just my childhood seems a little bit richer. It's exciting to learn the history of the area and what brought a lot of people here. Another benefit of exploring something right down your street is you can invite your friends. And one of my oldest childhood friends, somebody that I've known since kindergarten, I actually just called up and invited him out. So Steven is just about here. Then we're gonna make our way into here, continue this exploration. Well,
this is wild.
3 come to die.
Yeah, this is badass. What's up? What's going on?
Not too much, man.
It's super eerie with the fog.
Yeah.
This is badass. I mean, it's no hoist house, but... How do we meet? Oh, cool story. So kindergarten. There was probably about 30-something kids in the class. Teacher said, everyone, spread out, pick a partner. This is going to be your partner for the entire year. And everyone, me and Brent being super shy, everyone picked their partners. And then we were only 2 kids left. I looked over, saw the only redhead in the class. You looked over, saw the only black kid in the class. That was probably in 1991, and we've been friends ever since.
Oh, look at that. You got some of the old.
The first time
Wow.
I explored this, I was out here for half a day, by myself. I was like, this is so cool.
We got somebody in the comments might know what this is. I don't, but we got this. So these things that we're looking at here, these are kind of the dryers, the kilns for the wet phosphate when it's in here. So it's going to come into here, tumbled around, dried. It goes over there into those hoppers. feeds down onto the conveyor belts. That goes on that belt in between the two buildings that we're looking at, and then this goes over to the building that we were just in. But this is kind of where the big part of the process happens, and to see these still out here is just so cool. Imagining like the hopes and dreams and ambitions and ideas that the people had when they put these in, and now it just sits here, waiting for its next life. So now we're inside the dryer, and this thing would have been turning. You can see the ridges on the side. Really cool sound in here, kind of like a long reverb. I've seen some big ball mills in my day, some big jaw crushers, but I don't know that I've ever seen a dryer this big. Really, really cool. Oh wow, look, there's her chute down. Oh, from above. And in here with what I would believe would be the kiln, because this is kind of the fire rock that would have been supporting the heat. You can see the turning there. It's much quieter over here, once you get into the kiln part of it all. Just really cool to see. How does this compare to a mine for you?
I'd like to go back to the mines. You got all this Mad Max shit that could just grind us up. I'm not with that.
Another thing that's important to point out about this property is this is private property. I got permission from the owner to be out here to be filming. If you come out here, you will get arrested. The owners tell me that they arrest 2 people a week or something like that. So don't come out here. But if you're wondering, how can I tell who owns what property, whether it's public, private, all that, I use an app called Onyx Off-Road. And Onyx Off-Road is mainly an off-road navigation app. It has amazing trails on it. It has trail reviews of who was last there, photos, all that type of stuff. You can save these maps offline, so when you are going somewhere you're not gonna have service, you can at least still have your navigation. If you're wondering whether you're gonna have service or not, they have cell phone coverage maps of all the areas you're gonna go. And this has been an amazing tool for me on this trip. I can tell where I'm able to go, where I'm not able to go. Some cool trails around here. I look around here and there is this trail called Bone Valley that I might go check out after I'm done here. And if you ever want to check it out, they're giving 20% off anybody that's watching this. All you have to do is scan this code that's on the screen now, or you use Brent at checkout, and they're going to give you 20% off your first year of membership. It's been a huge game changer for me. It has just put me on all sorts of adventures. So if you're out there, I hope you check it out. And with that, we're going to go over here to an old office that apparently looks kind of like the day they walked away. Over in the old machine shop, you still got all your files and different things. What we got? We got different architectural drawings, oh, that's cool, drawings about the tumblers themselves. There you go. Maddox Foundry Machine Works, 1966. It's cool to see all of the documentation still there. And the technology that at the time they probably thought was, cutting edge with this hydro press. And now probably seems kind of archaic, but there's something nice to like the tactile nature of it. A lot of times these would become digital in these days, but to see them drawn in that way, it's really cool. For 100 years, phosphate was the industry here, with workers planning away in offices just like this. The Bone Valley area produced 75% of America's phosphate and employed over 14,000 people, literally feeding a nation. But by the late 1980s, foreign competition drove prices down. The industry that seemed unstoppable began to crumble. And in 1998, the fertilizer plant here shut down. Then, in August 2000, after 95 years of operation, this plant closed down too. And the people working in this office left. And now, this office just shows life put on pause. Binders and folders full of once important documents. Business plans still on the whiteboard, planning the year ahead. Names still hanging, showing who clocked in that day and who didn't. And when it seems modern like this, it seems to hit harder. It isn't the distant past. I recognize the floppy disks, some of the manuals that are thrown around, and I can't help but wonder if this is what all of our offices will look like one day. A place filled with dreams, barely holding on to being remembered. So far what we've seen makes sense. We've seen phosphate, we've seen the plants used to process it, and we can imagine why this was set up as a company town to support the agriculture industry here in America and around the world. But in the 1950s is when Nichols, this place, came attached to a very different type of industry, and one that is a very strange twist, because in the 1950s is when the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission decided that this was a place where they wanted to refine uranium. And phosphate always contains a trace amount of uranium, but as a byproduct of the fertilizer process, they decided that this is where they were going to create some uranium for the Cold War and to create nuclear weapons. And it's interesting, to think that a place set up to feed crops, to feed families, then became a place related to the Cold War. At this point, the government has not shown exactly where that plant was. It was set up for 10 years, it was dismantled, and it was kind of tried to be erased. But it happened, If you look online, the Wall Street Journal has a great resource showing where these places were, and the pin is just over that way, but that was just an estimate. If you read the Wall Street Journal article about it, it says, the Virginia Carolina Chemical Company was under contract to produce 12 tons of U-308 per year during the years 1952 to 1959. The facility that used to extract uranium was disassembled in 1960. The plant underwent a complete shutdown and abandonment between 1963 and 1973, and of 1979 was completely remodeled and modified from its original configuration. Documentation reviewed indicates that there is a potential for significant residual contamination outside of the period in which weapons-related production occurred. The facility used for these operations was removed in 1960. A subsequent survey in 1977 identified some residual soil contamination around the remaining pad, which was removed and does not appear to be significant. And with that, it just went back to being a normal fertilizer town. The weapons production was kind of swept away, but it led to the final chapter of Nichols' history, the end. When the uranium chapter ended for Nichols, it didn't just suddenly end. There's no disaster, there's no immediate shutdown, there was just less need. The same forces that helped build the town kind of worked against it. Roads got better, transportation improved, and there was just less need for the workers to live right here on site. And so slowly they left, the houses got packed up and sold, and the town and this plant became abandoned. And a lot of times that I go to, it's because the ore ran out, or there was a disaster, or Mother Nature changed the course of the town's history. And here, it wasn't kind of a sudden abandonment like that. It was just slow and quiet. And I think that's why towns like this often are just forgotten about, because there isn't that one inciting incident to point back to. And these days, again, as I look around, there's structures, there's still a name, there's a post office even. Most is forgotten. And for me, as someone who has pretty much dedicated my life for the past 6 years to preserving a town very similar to this, it hits me, you know? It hits me that all these things that we think are so important just maybe become a field like I'm looking at now. But I like places like this. I think it's important to tell the story. I think it's important to tell the history here, and that's why I'm here. I hope that's why you're watching. I hope you learned a little bit about Florida. I know that I did, even growing up 15 miles down the road, and I hope to maybe find somebody around here that can speak a little bit more to the history of Nichols, just to add that human element.